Hey, good morning all. So I guess in terms of this particular one, right, where we are right now, I'm going to kind of say the same thing, right? And I know people don't like this, in terms of the big picture, but the character of the price has not yet changed, right? And it still hasn't changed in the grand scheme of things. Where we go next is ultimately the deciding factor now in terms of how the next bigger move starts to play itself out, right? So what I want to do is just cover, first of all, a couple of the kind of likely scenarios, right? So I'm going to just reiterate the three things that I've said for the last 18 months, right? And these were the three options that I've covered kind of time and time again. But it's really important to understand what the differences are between these three options, right? So option one, when we called the top and we were talking about coming down, why the redistribution and then this kind of accumulation phase, right? If you look at the scale of this type of move, a 0, 1, back down to up 3, 4, 5, large scale one, right? This is a large scale one from there to there. A two isn't very likely to happen fast, right? So the issue that I have, and the issue that I still have with the lack of accumulation, is are we in a much larger move, right? And therefore, that's the optimal play, right? Now, obviously, in an ideal world, we would have had this come back down, right? Stay around this region for a lot longer, and potentially we would have saw the first leg one, right, inside that major move three, right? Because we would have had a 1, 2, we would be seeing a one back down to up three, right? And we can really break some barriers and boundaries, right? Now, the issue for me is we didn't have that particular reaccumulation, right? So question mark kind of starts as soon as this BlackRock kind of fake news broke out, right? And we kind of rallied on through. Right? That was a bit of a concern in terms of the best scenario, best picture, right? So with that being said, the next option and the next thing that we need to, we need to consider, we need to think about is what other options are there, right? Now, option two, I've talked about the scenario and the likelihood of a B, right? Now, there's a couple of options for B, right? And again, this is what people don't seem to understand. They think if it doesn't work on a 4 hour time frame, or you must be wrong, right? You're talking about a time frame that's taken 13, 14 years to actually play itself out here. Even if we go back from the 17 high, right? We're talking about nearly 7 years from a move one up to technically the move three, right? If this is a three. Either which way you look at it, whether it's 15 or whether it's seven, still a long time, right? These things don't play themselves out on a 4 hour time frame in a week. Right? And that's the one thing that I can't kind of stress and I can't emphasize. Right? Now, if I look at what I've talked about recently, and this is kind of the top of the B, right? So this is where for me it starts to get a bit more interesting. There's a scenario where you have the same schematic, right? So again, this is kind of where it's not very different. The only difference being is the buyer's climax actually starts in a different location, right? Now, first of all, and this is why this is kind of option one and option two within this B scenario, is that the BC to AR was that kind of big reaction. Right? Now, I kind of like that at the start. I kind of like that less in terms of where we currently are. Right now, it's not to say that either can't play themselves. I can't say that both of them can't play themselves out. Right? It's just a question of what the character tells you before one plays out over the other. Right now, just in terms of where we're at the moment, right? I wanted just to kind of highlight this. Now, obviously, the other thing is we're 3 years into Discord, right? We haven't had any reason to call for 100K just yet. We've actually got our lifetime membership on at the moment because it's our 3rd year anniversary, which is pretty cool. Um, Look, I wish personally we had the opportunity to say we're off to 100K, and you end up with hundreds of thousands of YouTube followers and Bybit links and all that kind of shit. the reality is that's not us, right? We want to be honest, we want to be transparent, and we want to say there's no logic right now screaming 100K, right? So in terms of the second option being the B, right? Now, for me, these two moves, right? And I'll come back to these in a second. These two moves happen based on this is a count one, two, 3, 4, 5, 1, right? Now, at this particular point, you've got basically a large swing down A, and we've got a large swing up B, right? Or full B there. There we go. So, with that being said, if we were to take an account, right, and take account on this, the optimal area for the perfect B, the zigzag B, was this. Again, much like the fake breakout on the BlackRock ETF launch and approval, right, we went up rather than down. Right? So for me, the zigzag the zigzag corrective move B, right, was actually off the table at this particular point for me. Right now, it's not to say that it can't be, and there's ways to manipulate the price into the chart that you want to see, and this and the other. So, I understand that, but I personally don't like it. Right. So the way that I'm seeing it at the moment, bear in mind the time frame. And this is just being realistic. Right. Bear in mind the time frame. If we were to see an AB, right, you actually have what they call a running flat. Now, for me at the moment, the running flat is probably still the most plausible of the three scenarios, right? Although the third option could be, and it could very much be bullish, bigger picture, right? If you were to take a trend extension and we look at from the low up to the high, this is the measurement of the leg A, right? We actually have this kind of region, this yellow line, right, which is about 81 and a half. You could probably flow to 83 with a little bit of height, right? So we've got 81 to roughly 83, right? That gives us a plausible option and a plausible view for a running flat B, right? Now, the reason that I like this and the reason that I think that this is still, a very big possibility is we're going to need to create some kind of UTAD if you assume schematic 1 of the Wyckoff distribution, right? Which means you take the price out of the previous high. Right? Now, this is also the option with the second schematic, right? So both options for a new all-time high are still very plausible, right? And you're going to have to look at things like the stochastic levels, right? The time frames. You've got a weekly, we've got a false bar, right? So I kind of like that fake out move up to the upside in terms of what it's going to do, right? We post halving, we got a price multiplier, we got 12 ETFs approved, right? As I said in the last video, my big question is why haven't we hit 100K yet, right? Or above. So with that being said, putting the options together, if we were to see a move up for a bigger move down, right? Don't take that as a negative. Don't see that as a negative, because if we come down, we're going to come down to a region of liquidity just sub kind of 30K. I think 30 to 25 is an optimal-ish area, right? We might drop a little bit deeper in terms of the fear as we start to move down there, but it doesn't have to be 12, it doesn't have to be 9, it doesn't have to go to 0. Now, obviously, at this particular point, we'd be seeing an ABC, which equals technically the 2, right? So at this particular stage, once we then have that 2 move, we can then start to see an impulsive move 1 bigger picture, right? And that's a nested move, which is why I'm drawing a circle around it. That nested move would basically mean that when you come back down for its 2, right, the 3 would actually want to break these current highs, right, plus, an 80 high, which means you'd actually have the momentum, right? And that's the optimal move for a play that looks something like this. Right? The reason that I keep saying nothing's changed is I've talked about this, especially with our members and subscribers and so on. I talked about this 18 months ago. I talked about this when we were on the way down in terms of the 3 scenarios that could actually play themselves out, right? And the main reason for the 3 scenarios is that it's a time factor. Right? If we're talking about such a big move and such a big cycle, people talk about cycles being 4 years for the halving and this, that, and the other. You have to think in terms of Elliott wave. There's no defined cycle term, right? as we kind of stretch itself out, it's going to expand, right? So the bigger the move, technically, the bigger the cycle. Now, if we assume that this is the count, and I like this count because it was very respectful on the way up, right? We managed to obviously call the top there, we managed to call the bottom, we managed to see the truncation, call the top again, and ultimately it's come back down, right? So for me, in these last 3 years since we've been doing this Discord server, we've had no reason, no logic. We have never wanted to shill, hey, we're off to 100K, right? We want to give the reality, and we want to give the logic and the rationale behind why these are plausible and real moves backed up with technical analysis from 25 plus years experience in my terms, and another 30 plus years experience in Paul's. So look, in the grand scheme of things, right, where we are right now, we you know we see the same two things, right? We're seeing potential for a running flat B, right? That's the best option. Now, the third option, and again, these are the options that I've talked about, time and time and time again, right? The third option was ultimately a bullish option, right? That basically give us this. Right? The bullish option, basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We truncate at 5, and where we're at right now, we've truncated at 5, right? So not really a nice option, because in the grand scheme of things, you still come back down, because this actually would be a 1 nested, giving us a 2 nested, right? So any which way, we're both in these situations of a 1 nested, 2 nested, or a running flat B, right? Biggest concern for me with this third option is if this is what we have as a bullish narrative, right? I've actually called this brutal. And the reason that this is brutal is that it's actually a pretty shitty move, bigger picture, because it limits the upside. Again, quite early on, we end up with another type of truncation. When I talk about truncation, I'm talking about this, when we saw 1, 2, 3, 4, and a 5, the idea of this being a move up, a lot of people were excited that this was a 1, this was a 2, we're going to see a 3, we're going to see a 4, and we get the 100K 5. Again, I've mentioned Plan B a million times. The guy was calling for 135K, which isn't even on the chart. We're actually more than half underneath that, and we are 3 years down the line, right? The issue being is understanding what is likely to happen based on the character and the price is obviously what has kept us in the game. What keeps us kind of going. And in the grand scheme of things, right, this isn't negative Bitcoin. This isn't Bitcoin death. This isn't negative, negative, negative. This is just realism. Right? Now, in terms of where we are right now, we've got obviously the distribution large scale and the better option for me. These are the two options that I've talked about here and here. Right? The big thing that keeps me coming back to the same conclusion, I guess, is this. We've got COT leverage funds, and these guys are net short. Right? That net short, to me, spells one thing. Who's buying, who's selling? Well, clearly with retail sentiment, the halving, the ETFs, we've had one of the CEOs of one of the ETF providers come out and say 90% of all the inflows at the moment are currently coming from retail. Right? I've talked about this again with our members. What I've talked about is the inflow that you expect to see early doors on a new instrument will actually be people like the IFAs, right? So the independent financial advisors giving advice to their personal clients, right? So, maybe you've got someone with 30, 40, 50 clients that are actually turning around and saying, oh, well, we need some exposure to your pension fund, and we're going to stick some of this exposure into Bitcoin, right? So this to me still doesn't scream big boys buy-in, because the question always comes back to, well, we've got 12 ETFs approved. Technically, you've got big boys buy-in. We've got the leverage funds, which are also big boys selling, and we've got a price multiplier that hasn't seen us breach 100K. Question, right? So putting all this together, the third option for me, like I said, is the brutal option, right? And that's why for me, I kind of feel still nothing much has changed, grand scheme of things. I'm going to come back to this. I like to see a little dance around here. I'd like to see a move up, potentially a new all-time high. I think that would trigger a lot of new orders and a lot of new, liquidity in the market. And then I think we do get, a decent kind of level type pullback, which whether it's the bullish two, right? So it's down for the two, or whether it's a corrective C, which means the bigger picture accumulation hasn't actually completed yet. And that's the best option overall, right? So, like I said, that's where we are right now. Again, thanks for you guys who have supported us, obviously, for the 3 years. Um, it's been a great bit of fun. We've actually done a lot of cool things in those 3 years, and it's pretty nice to see the kind of community that we now have. So again, thank you all for the current members, and guys, I will see you on the next video. Cheers.